So what I wanted to do is I wanted to discuss something in two parts. And the first part is basically I'll pose a question, and the second part is where I'm going to try to provide an answer. And you can agree or disagree with the answer. It's, of course, not all-encompassing. But the initial question that I have is, what freedom? What do we mean by freedom when we talk about freedom of religion? And freedom, I find, is one of those concepts that's quite interesting because, you know, when we think of freedom, we think of it as being, you know, encompassing of everything, that everybody can be liberated through a process of freedom. But I also think that with freedom, you have those who are included in that process, and you also have those excluded from that process of freedom. And the reason I bring this up is because I question just how contentious the idea of religious freedom is in the US right now, at least rhetorically. I understand that in practice, religious freedom might look a little bit contentious in the US, but on a rhetorical level, if we actually look at what's happening in America, and you'll have to forgive me, I'm speaking as an outsider, so my familiarity is based on the media that I consume, so please bear in mind, I'm situated in a particular milieu, and of course I'm influenced by these things. But the reason I bring up this idea of religion not being, or freedom of religion to be not that contentious on rhetorical levels is because it seems that the current administration seems to be promoting the value of religious freedom, which is very paradoxical. You know, if you're looking at what's happening in the US from an outsider's perspective, on the one hand, you have the president right now who signed an executive order in June of this year, an executive order on advancing international religious freedom, where the president, you know, highlighted that religious freedom is America's first freedom, and it's a moral national security imperative that this religious freedom should be, you know, internationalized. That we should advocate for freedom of religion as a security policy, as an international policy. The president just recently, on his, of course, numerous Twitter tirades, just recently had posted a tweet saying religious liberty, and that's all he had. That's all he said. He said religious liberty, vote ! And this is, of course, in his all caps sort of writing. So it seems on a rhetorical level that freedom of religion is something that even this current administration seems to be in favor of. But the question fundamentally becomes, well, for who are you advocating this freedom for? Is this religious freedom equal for all religious communities? Or are you targeting specifically certain communities to have access to this quote unquote freedom? And therefore, are there disparities in terms of the freedoms that some communities may have versus others? And I would contend that that certainly seems to be the case, that when we talk about religious freedom, we talk about religious freedom for some and not for all. And I think in the context of the US, at least from what I'm seeing when we talk about religious freedom, it's very much a religious freedom around you know, evangelical Christianity and quote unquote white religion, right? But does the same freedom itself apply to communities of color? Do they apply to communities, minority communities? I think that is something that I think a lot of us might question, right? To say that, well, as a Muslim, am I really truly free in the same way that a non-Muslim might be to practice and exercise their faith? And I'm not saying that this is just an issue in the US. I know in Canada, this has been an issue historically, especially in the province, my home province. I don't reside there anymore, but in Quebec, for example, there was a lot of contentions around the practice of religion and what they refer to as accommodation of those practices within a secular society. So it's not to say that only the United States is having issues with allowing people the liberty to practice their faith. This is also happening internationally, and I'm sure you know, it seems that Professor Ahmed has a lot more experience in the international realm than I would. But these ideas of extending freedoms or extending accommodations to religious groups has become a very sort of contentious issue in the world of what I would call hyper secularism or hyper nationalism. And religion therefore also religious freedom becomes a slogan. It's a slogan that perhaps doesn't have the same substance as we would want as communities of faith, right? So how do we change the idea of religious freedom from a slogan to something that's actually practiced? So that's the question. My answer: I'm an educator. The PhD that I'm pursuing right now is in the Faculty of Education, and I work with youth, and I work with mostly youth, minority youth, right? Um, and so what I would suggest, what freedom truly looks like, and this is a very sort of Western sort of conception of what freedom might look like. Actually, maybe not. In fact, I think that we see this idea in other faith traditions, but it's been co-opted by the West, is that freedom to me is knowledge. And I'll explain to you what I mean by this, right? If we truly want religious freedom, what I think we need is a knowledge of those religions to begin with. Because I believe we live in too much in our parochial places, right? We live in our insular communities where the knowledge of others is not something that we seek as individuals, and it's not something that we advocate as a society. And so what I have sort of argued for in my scholarship in the past is for religious literacy. And what is religious literacy? Religious literacy, much like the literacies around mathematics, around social sciences, around history, is that we have a deeper appreciation and knowledge, and more importantly, engagement with other faith communities for two reasons. The first is that it allows us to gain perspective of others, right? In knowing more about what a Hindu believes, or the practices of a Catholic, or how a Jain understands cosmology, the world around them, I have a better appreciation of the people who are around me. And there's freedom in that, because now the abstractions and the limitations that are placed on my mind in terms of how I know others, that those abstractions are liberated. I am more free in my knowledge and in my ability to engage with others because of that knowledge. I understand perspective, right? I have understood the situatedness of others. And then, therefore, that process of knowledge also brings back my own personal alleviation of my ignorance. So there's a rapprochement with others through that knowledge, and there's also then an internal sort of rapprochement that's happening as well, where I know more about others, and therefore I know more about myself. So what does religious freedom look like to me? I think religious freedom is where we actually care to know more about the people who cohabit the same spaces as us, and it can't be mere it can't be mere tolerance. Tolerance is not enough. To tolerate my Hindu neighbor or my Jewish friend is not taking it far enough. What we need is a true engagement. It means if I have a Sikh friend, it means going to the Gurdwara. It means that if I have a Catholic friend, it might mean going to the church. And I think, especially in the societies that we live in the globalizing world that we live in, that globalization has to go hand in hand with a cosmopolitanism, right? This idea that we live in a cosmopolitan society that has variety, that has diversity, that has pluralism. And in order for me to really live a free life, the freest life I can possibly live, if that is the goal that we have in a truly democratic society, that freedom has to be anchored in an appreciation for the people that reside around me and with me. And so very, very succinctly, what I advocate for as an educator is that we should have a deeper education of religions, not an education in religion. I'm not talking here about catechism or religious education that happens in communities. I'm talking about education of religions in much the same way that we are educated about history or math or social studies or whatever the case may be, I believe that there needs to be a deeper sort of understanding of these religious communities around us, and I think that would be a great way to actually not just rhetorically have religious freedom, but to actually live it in practice. And I'll leave it at that.